Hi, Lakeview Intermediate School. My name is Mo, and I'm with Oklahoma Forestry Services. And your school has invited me and my friend Riley out to your school to help you guys with a pretty special planting. I know back in the fall when we had our historic ice storm back in October, you lost one of the trees that you guys are fond of in your schoolyard. And today, we had the opportunity to help you guys plant it. And your school invited us to come, and me specifically, to come talk to you guys a little bit about how important trees are and specifically what you can learn from the tree that you had on your schoolyard. What's kind of neat is once the tree has been taken out, you should have what's left over is a stump. And I'm sure most of you have seen a stump before walking in the woods or going hiking, or even in your yard if you've had a tree removed from the ice storm. And you see what's left on the bottom. You can see some interesting parts of the tree. What's cool about the tree stump is that it can tell us a lot about that tree's life, stuff that we might not have known had the tree not died. And when you look at that tree stump, you're going to see rings. Most of the time, most of you have probably seen those rings before and you've searched for them. And most of you may know that those rings are called tree rings, and they can tell you about how old the tree is. Now, I obviously am not at your school right now while I'm filming this, but I've got some what we call tree cookies with me. And tree cookies are pretty cool because you can see all the different tree rings in this cookie. Now, this is obviously a smaller tree and a much different tree. And when you see a tree stump out in nature, you're not going to see these lines as perfectly as you can see them now. These lines are very visible because we have sanded this down. When you see a tree that's been cut, the chances are the chainsaw that cut it down didn't smooth it perfectly. This has been sanded and smooth, and we add a little bit of oil and a sealant to it to give it a nice smooth finish. And because of that, you can see the very distinct lines. Now, when you're looking at it, you might be wondering, how do I even count those? That's kind of a tricky thing to do. Well, if you look, you'll see that there's dark rings and there's light rings. Now, the light rings are what we call spring wood or early wood, and that is from the initial growth in a year. So that's going to happen during spring and summer. And that's when our days are longest, when we have the most rain, and that's when the tree does the most growth. And then the dark wood is autumn wood or late wood, and that is going to be the growth that happens in the late summer down into fall. Trees don't typically grow the entire year. They typically go dormant in the fall and winter, late fall and winter. So that late growth gives us our dark ring, and so the light ring and the dark ring together give us 1 year of growth. And so when you count a tree cookie's rings, you can count either the light or the dark one. Now, I'll save you the trouble because I don't know if you're going to be able to pause this, but you can count. This one's probably in its 20s somewhere. But what's cool about tree cookies is you can see some other stuff. If you look at it closely, you see in the middle is a darker part of the tree. That is what we call the heartwood. That is the oldest part of the tree. Now, trees are living, breathing organisms, right? And so they are constantly growing and putting on new cells. Well, the new cells happen in the xylem and the phloem, and that happens just inside of the bark. And so that's where all the new growth is. So that means that the middle part of the tree is the oldest part of the tree, and that's the part of the tree that's dead. But that gives it the strength of the tree. And so that's going to be a part that you can see. You can see this tree's not very centered. So it must have been growing either on a hillside or on a spot where it got more sun on one side. So you can see it's kind of not a perfect circle. So we've got less growth here, more growth here. What's kind of neat as you look at these tree rings close up is you can see that some years the tree rings are fatter and some years they're smaller. And we can tell a lot by that. You can tell how much water there was that year if there was a drought. You know, Oklahoma definitely goes through its ebb and flows of drought years and then years where we have lots of floods. Even there our flooding events, we had a couple years ago, we had some of those. We had our mini flood events and then our mini droughts. And then It also could mean if the rings are larger that the tree had less competition. So sometimes if trees are growing right next to each other, they're obviously competing for that same sunlight, they're competing for the water that's in the soil, and they're competing for space. And so if trees grow further apart, they're going to have less competition. They'll be able to get the sunlight and the water and the nutrients from the soil and grow a little bit better. So those are some of the kind of things that you would see. Now, some other cool things that you can see on my tree cookie here is that this was either a branch or it was a tree growing next to it. I'm going to assume it's probably a branch just based on the size of the tree. But what's cool is you can see that this branch also has its own center. So it's got its own growth rings on each branch. So you can often tell if you were able to get a slice of a branch, you could tell how old the branch was, and that can give you some clues about how old a tree was. But do you guys think that you could ever find out how old a tree is just by taking a slice of a live tree? Could we do that? We couldn't, could we? Because if you take a slice out of the middle of a tree, what's going to happen to the tree? It'll just fall right over, right? So typically we can't tell how old a tree is unless we knew when the tree got planted, or there's another way you can tell how old a tree is, and that's by drilling a core into it, drilling into it and pulling a core out, and then you can also count the rings from there. So some pretty cool things that we can tell. So the next time you get a chance to go out with your class into the schoolyard, you can go take a look at your tree stump that was left from your Bradford pear, and maybe you can see how old it was. If you can't get a really good visualization of the tree rings that you see, you could probably ask the school and see when it was planted. It might have been planted when your school was built, which I believe is in the 90s. But it also could have been there before your school was built. It's one of those things that's hard to know. I'm going to guess it was probably built in the 90s, which meant that tree was probably about 25 years old. And in Oklahoma, those Bradford pears, they're not known for doing too well. The way they grow, they don't do well in ice storms, which you guys found out the hard way, huh? So hopefully the new tree that will be planted, you guys will take care of it and it will grow to be a beautiful, thriving tree. Now it's going to take everybody's work to make sure that that tree is protected. Obviously we don't want to stomp on it. We don't want to add anything to it while it's growing, because you are getting it as a small tree. And what are all the things that trees need to grow? So they're going to need sunlight, like we talked about. They need space. So obviously you don't want to like do happy dances around it as it's growing, especially when it's just a little guy. It needs sunlight, space, it needs air. What kind of air does it need? Does it need oxygen like us, or does it need something else? It needs carbon dioxide. So we actually give it our carbon dioxide when we're breathing. We're not actually doing an exchange, but it gets the carbon dioxide from the air. And it also is going to need nutrients from the soil. And that soil is going to need to be able to get aerated as well. So your school may put mulch around it as it gets bigger, just so it can be a little bit more protected and then not get so compacted. But it might not. A lot of trees in Oklahoma don't necessarily need that. So it's something we might need. And then obviously you're giving it space, you're giving it sunlight, it's going to get water, and then it will get carbon dioxide. So those are the things that the trees need to grow. So I really hope that you guys get a chance to see your new tree, and thank you for bringing us out here. We're going to do a little bit of a program later to talk about how trees work, because there's some pretty cool things in there that you can talk about. But thank you for having me in your classrooms, and I hope that after COVID is over that I get a chance to come see your school and teach you guys in the classroom. I've got some fun stuff to show you. So thank you guys and have a great day.